Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Using CAS for Evaluating Program Effectiveness in Student Learning. My name is Brianne, and thank you for joining us. We hope that you're all staying healthy and safe, and we're really excited to have you here and share from our presenters. So if you are new to Weave webinars, I just want to review the control panel really quickly. Over on the far left, you can control whether you'll have the sound coming through your computer or your phone. And if you are having any technical difficulties, you can go ahead and use the chat feature to send us a message, and we'll try and help you out with that. And we would like to ask if you have questions to submit those to the Q&A, and we will share those at the end, and our presenters can answer those for us. And if you do need to leave for any reason, you can either close out of your window or click leave the webinar, and that's over on the far right. We are recording the session today, so if you need a copy or know anyone else who would be interested in watching it, we'll be sending that out afterwards. And finally, we will have a short survey that pops up at the end, so don't be alarmed when a Survey Monkey window pops up. And your feedback really shapes what we do, so we'd really appreciate it if you could take a couple of minutes to complete. And with that, I'll let Dr. Ray Van Dyke, who's our Senior Vice President here at Weave, introduce our speakers. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Brianne. And thank all of you for being here. As Brianne said, we hope that everyone is staying healthy. We know this is a really interesting, the words are beginning to escape me of how to describe this this territory that we're in these days. So we know on campuses that there are lots of other things going on that need your attention. And we're just so grateful that you came today to hear this webinar. And I know you're not going to be disappointed because we have some great speakers. Again, the name of the webinar is Using CAS for Evaluating Program Effectiveness in Student Learning. Our presenters are Gavin Henning and Jen Wells. Pardon me, that's probably a little strange hearing that with all that's going on, but I promise I'm safe even virtually. Gavin is a professor and program director of higher education programs at New England College. Almost needs no introduction to this audience because you're very, very familiar with him and his work, and as currently and as past president of the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education. Having published in this area and presented at many, many conferences. And along with him today is Jen Wells from Kennesaw State University. She's Director of Assessment there and Assistant Professor of Higher Education, also probably someone that's likely known by a lot of people in this audience. She's the editor for the CAS standards in which are very, very familiar to us. And this, I'm sure, is going to be a webinar that will be very, very helpful for you. And at this point, I will go ahead and turn the screen over to Gavin and Jen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ray. We're excited to be here and share some information about CAS. Really, this is an overview session about what CAS is, some background on CAS itself, and also on how to use CAS. And we'll give you some details and overview about how to actually go ahead and use CAS for a self-study, which is one of the primary ways that we use CAS. So our hope is at the end of this session that you'll be able to identify different approaches to quality assurance, particularly using CAS and CAS standards for that. And Jen will go into more detail about what that really looks like. We'll talk about some of the tools that are available through CAS to help you do that self-study, and really share some tips that we've learned from others who have done this about how you want to go about doing a program review and self-study. If you're not familiar, CAS was founded in 1979. Now it's a consortium of 40 higher education associations. They originally came together to develop standards for master's preparation programs. Out of that original conversation came CACREP, the organization that accredits counseling programs. But even though that organization was doing that work, individuals thought we should really take a look at standards of practice for functional areas in higher education. And so that consortium started with 8 organizations, is now grown to 40, and we developed about 47 sets of functional area standards. A couple of new ones are on the horizon. And then we also have 3 cross-functional frameworks. And cross-functional frameworks are actually something new to CAS. It's a new resource where it really identifies how to address an issue that transcends any one office on campus. For example, our first one was first-year experience programs. And so the cross-functional framework really articulates what does that team look like, who needs to be on there, how should they do their work. So it's a similar goal as the functional area standards, but really focuses on a major issue, not a functional area. As you can see, our CAS vision and our mission really is not just about the standards, but using the standards to an end. And that end is really the development, assessment, and improvement of quality learning programs and services. So for us, the focus is really on student learning and student development through the creation of programs and services, which are those functional areas, those departments within higher education. Now, many folks know CAS standards as being a self-study tool, but actually there are a lot of different ways to use CAS. Use that for designing new programs and services. Thinking about if you're limited in terms of your time and energy, if you've got a small staff, what may be the areas within a functional area you want to really put your time and energy. Doing staff development, thinking about what are the skills and knowledge that may be needed for staff to really do the best job you can in your office. Think about strategic planning. You know, what are those key things that you really want to focus on? How do you develop a strategic plan to support that? Obviously, developing learning and development outcomes and implementing those. And then finally, measuring program and service effectiveness. In our functional area standards are guided by a number of key principles, actually 5 of them. The first one is really looking at students and their environment. And that really focuses on the mission of the department. What are the programs and services it's providing? How is it supporting student learning, development, and success? And how is it assessing all that work? So that really is the essence of what a functional area is about. We also think it's important to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there is a section in the CAS standards that actually addresses that. And what does that look like? What role does a department play both in fostering diversity, equity, inclusion in their area, but how can they be an advocate at the institutional level? It's also important for a strong organization to look at what's the leadership, what's needed in terms of human resources, what are all those elements of the infrastructure that need to be in place to do that work. And then obviously ethical considerations. Are there particular laws and policies that apply to that functional area? Are their ethics different than they might be in other areas? And the CAS standards outline what that looks like. And then learning conducive structures. So what else supports the infrastructure for how that department works, including their finances, technology, and then their facilities. So here's a list of all of them that currently, and obviously it's pretty small and you might not be able to see it all, but if you go to our website, cas.edu, and just click on standards, you can see a list of all of those. But we have an ongoing list, and as we update these, we add those to our list on our website, so you can get a sense of all the different areas. But as you can see, most of these are in student service areas. There are some that could be in either academic affairs or student affairs, such as academic advising, registrar, financial aid, those type of areas. But really, it's about student support services and student services is really where this came from. And we have what are called the general standards. And the general standards really do a couple different things. First of all, they're the main sections of which the functional area standards are divided. So every functional area, all 47 of those, are divided into these 12 sections. And so these are the main components. And if you're familiar with CAS standards, you'll notice that there's been some changes in our last revision that came out in 2018, but it was launched with the book that came out this past spring. And what we've done, we've added some changes, including a new section on student learning, development, and success. We really wanted to highlight that. We moved assessment up. It was the last step before. We wanted to highlight that a little bit more. And we've done some collapsing of some of the other categories. But really, these are the 12 main sections. And then the sections are divided into the actual general standards and functional area standards. So general standards are standards that go across all functional areas. They're the exact same thing. They cannot be changed in CAS language. And so for an example, there is at the bottom left of the screen, the functional area must develop and define its mission. So it doesn't matter what the functional area is, that area should look at its mission. And then the functional area standards are individual standards that are focused more on that functional area. Here's an example of a mission functional area standard for career services. And so interwoven for all of those are both general standards and functional area standards. So each of those 12 sections will have some general standards within them and those functional area standards. And then to make things even more complicated, we have standards and guidelines. And so standards are really the indispensable requirements. It's really important to highlight that CAS is not about best practice. CAS is about basic practice. Because CAS is really about what should every functional area be able to do regardless of size, regardless of resources. So the CAS standards apply to, let's say, residence life at Ohio State University, which is ginormous, and is the same standards applied to Little New England College residence life where I work. The standards are in bold. They use words like must and shall. So they're really easy to identify. And then our guidelines are opportunities to really do some enhanced work. So if you already meet the standards, if you want to do a little bit more, this is what the guidelines outline what that can look like. And then the verbs are should and may. And those appear in light face types. You can tell the difference between those and the standards. CAS is not only a set of standards for program review, program development, but we also have a set of learning domains and dimensions. Because it's really important that we focus on learning, student learning development. And as I mentioned, because the end goal for CAS is really this area. It's the functional areas, the departments don't exist in and of themselves. They exist to foster student learning and development. And so CAS has outlined a number of student learning outcome domains that can guide the work of a department. And as you look at these, they look pretty familiar. You probably see some similarities to other outcome frameworks. CAS does not dictate what any functional area, which ones any functional area should focus on. We just want functional areas to decide which ones fit best, and then implement programs and services to support those, and then to assess those. And another thing to know about CAS is there are no CAS police. And you really can use CAS however you want. Jen will talk a little bit about that in the program review section to describe what are the different ways you could use CAS for program review. And really the ultimate goal is thinking about what is that student learning that's fostered, what's the evidence that those outcomes are achieved or not achieved, and how do you use that evidence to really think through and making improvement in student learning development and success. And this is a grid that really combines some of the various outcome frameworks, including CAS as well as ACNU Essential Learning Outcomes, Learning Reconsidered, even some themes from some of the discipline accrediting agencies, the degree qualification profile from NILOA, and then Project CEO, which was a project collaborative with NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, and employers to identify what are the outcomes that employers think are most important. And as you look at this, you can easily map across to see where there are similarities and where there are differences. But for the most part, there's a lot of similarity across all of those. CAS would love you to use the CAS learning domains and dimensions. That's our preference. But we're okay if you use another one of them. We just want you to use some learning outcome framework, and it could even be your own, but some framework to guide the learning outcome usage and assessment in your programs and services. And so this really is, the whole goal is based on Aston's IEO model, input, environment, and outcome. So really thinking about how do we influence that environment, that middle block. You know, the input is what students bring, their knowledge and skills, their experiences, and the outcome is what we hope they leave our institutions with. And then we have the environment to work with. And so that's what our area and hopefully the functional areas and the departments have some impact on that environment. Some fundamental assessment questions when you really think about assessing student learning outcomes as well as program evaluation. Think about what's working, what's not working, what evidence would you need to know if something was working? What are those opportunities for improvement, both in student learning or in the program overall? And so those are the key questions that guide a CAS program review. And we've built those into some of the resources we have available. And so really these are the undergirding questions for assessment. But we've built the process and the system that will help you answer these questions if you go use CAS resources for a self-study. And this would probably be no surprise for folks who do assessment work, but really this is how the many ways you can apply the outcomes. You know, thinking about writing learning outcome statements from those domain areas, doing some alignment of cross experiences. You know, it could be vertical alignment, so aligning across multiple departments within a division. It could be our horizontal alignment or vertical alignment, aligning with the institution. Could guide assessment plans. Hopefully engage students in their own learning opportunities so they're co-creating that learning along with you, and then getting ready for that self-assessment. And there are more we could add to this list as well. Now I'm going to pass it over to Jen to really talk about the self-study process and overview, and then she'll take it from there.
Okay, good afternoon, or I guess good morning in some places. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about self-assessment. And for those of you that may be wondering how self-assessment versus outcomes assessment differ or relate, I like to think about self-assessment as looking at the holistic picture of your organization, which can then help drive how well you're doing with your outcomes. For instance, you may be assessing student learning in a particular leadership program. Well, maybe you're not seeing improvement, but it's because of resource allocation or the way that your office is structured. And so this really helps give you a holistic view. And so some of the fundamentals that we believe about self-assessment is it really is internally driven. I think that's why we use the self-assessment language. It allows for a systematic and regular approach, and it can be effective in terms of time and cost. And we'll talk about some of the differences in how you can approach this. And it really does provide some accurate information that can help you support staff development, provide recognition, and make improvements. Okay. And it'll help really provide a shared vision. It really relies on honesty and meticulous evaluation, and it creates an action plan for improvement, which is really the core piece of this. I mean, in an ideal world, you could do a self-assessment, which would lead to an action plan and improvements, which could create your strategic plan, which you could then assess. And so that's how some of these all come together. We offer self-assessment guides for each of those functional areas that Gavin showed you earlier. And so what it does is it takes that standard and creates it into an instrument that you can use to guide this. And we have an effective workbook format for this. And so there's directions that is ideally designed for you to be able to pick this up, read through it, and be able to execute. Now that's if you want to do it exactly as it is, but as I'll talk about here, there is no one way to do this. I like to say there are no CAS police. And so this is really designed to help you achieve the goals that you're really looking at doing. And so if you go to the next slide here, this is a snippet of one of our self-assessment guides. And so I like to show this because I think it highlights what it offers you. And so for here, this is part 4 assessment. So in each of the parts, you'll see suggested evidence and documentation. And so these are recommendations to help guide you. This was an improvement CAS had made several years ago as we saw people struggled really with the evidence piece. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, that really is the core to doing a really quality self-assessment, and it's really one of the most beneficial aspects. And then we have clusters of criterion measures. So here we have 4.1, establishing a culture of assessment. And so one of the newest changes in the 2009 iteration of the standards is that we have these criterion measures and clusters within the standards as well. And so it really helps one-to-one between the SAG and the standard. And you can see that there is a space for rating, and you rate holistically here. If any of you have had experience with regional accreditation or specialized accreditation, this is a similar approach to we're in compliance or not, someplace there. As Gavin mentioned, these are really good practice, basic practice. So there is no exceeds expectations here. It's just meets. So we've simplified that scale. And then I like to point out that the does not apply is not a get out of jail free card. It's not, we don't care, but there's some area, maybe your functional area is split in two. And so it really doesn't apply to the work that you do. But otherwise, because of the process that we go through the standards, they really have been reviewed by experts in the field. So they should be universal, but that allows you to say when it does not apply. And then the justification for the rating is where you have a narrative explanation. And we have found recently in the feedback that this space is one of the best uses of the instrument because it gives some narrative there. Now, these are our CAS program review steps. And so you can see there are 7 steps here, and it begins with the process, the team, evidence, ratings, action plan, report, and improvements. So you can think about the plan, do, checked, act type, it's similar to your assessment cycle in that we're gonna have information that feeds in, we're gonna go through a review, and ultimately lead to action and improvements. And so I will briefly talk about all of these. I want to let you know we can generally do this in a half day. So there's a lot of nuances within this. We try to articulate that in the self-assessment guides as well, but feel free to reach out to people who have done self-studies and we can sort of help guide you through this if you want a more personal approach. But today what I'm going to do is talk about if you are approaching this holistically and you want to do all these steps and you're looking at either a functional area review or a division review. But there are always ways in order to make this work for you. And then I will end with some tips. So the first step is the process. So if we can click. So we're going to plan the process. I think this is really important because there's a couple of steps. And if on this next slide, there's a couple of things for you to think through. One is what is going on currently? Where are you at in your assessment landscape? And that may be at your department, division, or university level. Is the university engaging in a strategic planning process? Is it up for reaffirmation? So what is currently going on? Did you just do a large scale assessment project? So where are you at to see if this is the right time? And then you want to think about your steps. When are we going to start? Who's involved? How are we going to do this? And identifying outcomes for the self-study. I think that's really important. And one of the things I talk about in assessment in general is what's your assessment why? And so we often spend a lot of time talking about how you do all this and what you need to do, but I think people want to know why, what's ultimately happening. So this isn't just an exercise. And then really looking at developing a preliminary timeline, because this isn't something that happens in 1 week. And I think it's good to acknowledge that in the beginning. So once you plan the process and you determine this is the right time and we're going to engage in this, then you're going to assemble and educate your team. And so the team can look there's lots of different ways to do this. But one of the core pieces that we suggest is having somebody to coordinate this. Ideally, it wouldn't be the unit leader. So if we're talking about a functional area here, it would be somebody outside the unit that provides a more objective point of view, and the unit leader really does have some responsibilities that I will talk through as we go. And so having somebody to coordinate, it's like many of the initiatives we do, as long as we have a leader, it really helps keep us organized and moving forward. And then we want to invite members of the institutional community to participate. We really talk about 3 different approaches that you can take here. And the first is that you have an internal approach. So you decide to do a true self-study and you're going to gather your team from your functional area to review your standards. And so to really go through this process and collect evidence. And so it's truly internal. Mixternal, which Gavin termed, which I love this phrase, is really having internal to your institution, but external to the unit. So potentially you're in housing and residence life, and you may find partners in career services, in registrar. And so you're bringing people in the faculty that you may be bringing in, but you're still internal to the institution. And then external is where you really bring somebody from outside the institution in to review. Now you can pair these together, so potentially you do an internal or mixternal review, and then you have somebody external come in to really ascertain whether that's accurate. So they come in to look at that. And then in composition, thinking about potentially staff member from elsewhere in the division, outside the division, a faculty member. Students are wonderful participants because often they actually provide some of the more realistic reflections on the area. And I think a piece that's really important is to include diverse representation. The more thoughts that you can bring into this, the higher quality this will be. And so initially you want to hold a training session. Now, a lot of times in that training session, I like to open with some of the earlier sides that CAS, that Gavin talked about what is CAS, what does it mean, what is self-study, maybe even covering why program review is important. That earlier slide where you identified why you're doing this, you want to bring that so people understand why they're there. And in terms of team ground rules, I think that's setting, there is no wrong answer. This is a safe space. Honesty is appreciated and valued. Going over the standards and guidelines is really important. It takes time, but if you're bringing people from outside of your area, there may be language or terminology that they're unfamiliar with. And so you want to bring them there so that they can create this understanding as they're going through the evidence. Inter-rater reliability and just really having communication expectations for what is this going to look like at the end and what does our time look like. So then we identify, collect, and review evidence. I will tell you that is probably the most time-conducive part of this approach. But the more time spent in collecting evidence, the better the outcome is. And so it's really worth it. And I've had a lot of areas say that just the exercise of collecting evidence was really helpful to see what are we actually documenting or what are we think we're doing versus what we're putting out for the community to understand. So it's a really valuable part, but it is time consuming. So the unit needs to gather evidence and data. And so this is really, it helps to be driven by that suggested evidence area under each part. Now, if you don't have the evidence there, this isn't the time to create the evidence. It's just part of the review. It may be that some of your action steps is that you need to put more documents and resources on your website. So I think that's a really important part, but this should be done by the unit. And I think at this point, it's looking at how are we going to document this with so many online organizational platforms. You can use Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever it is that you want to use to organize. I think that's really helpful. And so you're looking at evidence, and I suggest you organize the evidence based on part. And so then the review team, once the unit, so housing and residence life, collects all of their data and puts there, the review team is really spending their time rating the standards. So they're employing an evidence-based evaluation. I say this and really strongly encourage people to be as honest as possible, to remember this is about what the evidence shows, not what we think or we want. And so that's really important. So I remember when I was in conduct, we used to say, this isn't about the individual, this is about the behavior. And so I think this is the same thing. This is an evaluation of the evidence, not of the unit. And so that really helps. And I think really encouraging the team to be as honest as possible. And what we suggest is that individuals rate every criterion measure. And so that's the approach we take, which in the next step is really evaluating and conducting those ratings. And so again, using an evidence approach, what we suggest is a two-tier judgment. This means that the individual member of the team evaluates the criterion, and then you come together to come up with a consensus. And again, what we're hearing from people is that's the strength of this process, is that discussion. Where are there discrepancies? Why is there a discrepancy? Are we seeing the evidence differently? And that helps inform the unit. Okay, our mission is unclear. One person interpreted it as this is our mission, and another interpreted it as this. And so that really helps us be able to provide clarity. So that discussion, and there are worksheets used to help you document those discussions. And like I said here, those discussions are absolutely important. And what that does is lead to the action plan. And so this is where you start to get to the core of, okay, we've brought our team together, we've collected our evidence, we've had this discussion, now what are we going to do with all of this? So there are overview questions at the end of each rating section, and these are more of that holistic, take a step back and think about that. So in student learning, development, and success, okay, what are we really doing for here? What is our story about our role in this area? And then you'll want to identify good areas of good practice and areas of improvement. While the standards, while the self-assessment guides are generally designed to help you have areas of improvement, they're also designed to say, we're doing well here. Like, let's take stock in that and let's recognize that we did well. And then you're going to articulate recommendations for next steps, resources, what the time frame is, responsible individuals, really getting down into a true action plan for how are we going to improve. And one thing I caution is that ideally you do a program review every 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years. So this isn't something that your timeline should say, we're going to fix all of this in the next 2 months. Part of this is making priorities and decisions about what we want to do. And sometimes we find that there's an area you need to improve, but once you improve that, it will have a domino effect and improve some of the other areas. So trying to think through all of that, but this shouldn't evolve into panic where we need to fix everything by tomorrow. That's not the idea. It's to be more strategic. And so preparing the report, and I think this really comes from that review team, and it's really helpful for the unit to see, okay, what were your discussions? Where were the discrepancies? And just as a side note, I've mentioned this a little bit, but there are worksheets at the end of every self-assessment guide. And so these worksheets help you walk through this. It has you identify your discrepancies, your areas of good practice, your areas of improvement. It specifies standards for you. It has a worksheet for developing a timeline and an action plan. So we really want to put this together into a report. I will tell you, as an assessment person, I want people to spend most of their time on the actions and the improvements and not in the exercise of writing. But I think this narrative is extremely important, and it provides evidence for your next review. And thinking, what's your most effective format? You probably have multiple audiences. So your vice president may want an executive summary. Your unit may want the longer, more evidence carrying place with all the discrepancies and worksheets. It's often important to communicate back to students too. Let them know what you're doing, where your areas of improvement are. Involve them in the process. It gives them ownership and helps them make more connections to the work that you're doing. And so really it's going through the report and having this documented, and then it will help guide you for the next 3 to 5 years. And so finally, and again, what I think is really the most important part here is really closing the loop and managing change. And in essence, closing the loop doesn't mean, okay, we did it, we stopped, we put it all in writing, we can put it on a shelf or in a folder and say we did it, pat ourselves on the back and move forward. Closing the loop is really, okay, we've gone through this exercise, we've done all of these steps, now what are we going to do to improve? What is truly our approach to executing the action plan that we have taken? And one of the things I like to say here is when you're taking stock and you're planning the process, one of the most important pieces is to ensure that the unit has the ability to make improvements. So to go through this self-study and be able to do this action. I think that's really important and helps for the buy-in with the amount of work that this does take. So I think really thinking about that earlier. I can't promise you're going to get new resources from this. Resources, especially right now, it may not be new resources, but you may learn to reallocate resources in a way that's going to help improve the work that you're doing. And so putting this out there, communicating this plan, being open, maybe letting people know right now we can't improve this because of this, but we're going to do this instead. So for example, we found that we need additional counselors, but right now we don't have funds to hire new counselors. So we're going to have more group counseling time. So we're going to communicate that and acknowledge that we heard that area, and this is our way of acknowledging that. And so we can move on. And this is tips and lessons that we've gathered from users. So this comes directly from people that have gone through this process, and we've collected these to help others. And again, a reminder that the materials are flexible, that leadership is critical. A lot of people have said that having administrative support is really helpful in the sense that they can help collect evidence and organize that while others are really collecting it. So I think that's really helpful. And being clear about workload expectations. So what is this going to look like? What is your responsibility as a reviewer? Timelines, they say, will save your life. That's literally the quote that we heard from them. Again, I've stressed this a lot, but the evidence is super key to this. The more evidence you have, the better the process. And one of the things you'll learn in a self-study is you have way more evidence than you ever thought that you did. So it can seem overwhelming at first, but it all does come together. And this last one here is actually it's a newer point, and one that I think has a lot of value to it, in that you have informational interviews. So for example, fraternity and sorority life has a lot of names, a lot of acronyms, a lot of terminology that may not be familiar to other people. So bringing somebody in to say, okay, let me talk to you about what this all means so that you can understand terminology. Or for the session when you're reviewing finance, bringing in a budget manager who can clarify some of the evidence. So when you do have questions, it's okay to bring those individuals in to discuss. And I would just make note where there's a differentiation between a lack of evidence and what somebody's talking about, because it may be that they need to put that into documentation, which may be helpful in the future. And then some team members are afraid to be honest, and I think encouraging people that giving a higher rating than what the evidence says doesn't help the unit. If the unit has an area to improve, it's better for them to know that this is a self-study. So this is you going in with your own areas of improvement. If someone doesn't let you know, then you can't improve that. I was doing a presentation with another colleague on CAS, and we were saying it's as if you're standing in front of a room with a big poppy seed in your teeth, and no one tells you. You would want someone to tell you. And so I think that's important. Again, allowing staff to implement the changes. So going through this whole process and really following through, having discussion about the rating scale, rationale, evaluation, understanding of the standards is really helpful in going through. And then again, leaving time at the end if there are areas that you struggle. So that was a fairly quick overview of the process. We offer a lot of resources that will help you through this. So we do have the 10th edition of the CAS Professional Standards and the self-assessment guides. If you have an earlier edition, I would encourage you to look into these. Our editions, while we use the term edition, they really are large overhauls. And this is one of the biggest changes we have made in terms of our standards. And so I do encourage you to get the most updated version. We've really been responding. Plus, there's several new standards out, for example, sustainability. And the developing and assessing outcomes. So if you had ever heard of our FALDOs, which were the frameworks for assessing learning and development outcomes, we're coming up with a version 2.0. It is coming very soon. We have design, we're working with getting it printed basically as we speak. So take a look at that. So if you are maybe struggling or need assistance with how do we assess these outcomes, this is a great resource. A DIY guide, which again expands on what we provide in the self-assessment guide. So how do I pick this up and do it myself? Again, this is in the editing stage, so it's coming very soon. I think May is our goal. Gavin mentioned the cross-functional frameworks. I do want to highlight the multifunctional review process. So if you are a unit where maybe you have several functional areas within, sometimes this happens at smaller institutions, or sometimes just the way an office is organized, the multifunctional review process helps you look at multiple functional areas and bring that together. We do offer a process where we can build that for you, but the multifunctional review process can walk you through how to do that yourself. And it goes from sort of a generic model using the general standards to a very specific tailored process to you. So you can look into that. We have faculty resources. We're building that consistently, and actually we're coming out with some graduate student specific resources as well. And then there's white papers and resource papers on the site. For example, how do you use CAS with accreditation? Or here's an example using TRIO programs. And just to let you know, we have another webinar coming up soon. It's using CAS to support regional accreditation. It is June 3rd from 1 to 2 p.m. And so if you're coming up on reaffirmation, or you're just going through this, or you want to learn how to create better relationships across institutional effectiveness with student affairs, academic support, this is a great webinar to attend as well. And so if you want to connect with us, we have 2 user groups on Facebook. So we have 2-year college professionals and 4-year college professionals. It's a great way also to get questions directly to CAS leadership if you're interested. And so those are great resources for dialogue between each other. And we have a general Facebook page as well as Twitter and YouTube. So you can check all of those out. And then again, our website is cas.edu. This is where you can get the self-assessment guides. They're also available on the website individually, as a collective, or through the Campus Labs program review platform. And then we have a resource center as well. And please feel free to reach out and let us know if you have questions, if you need resources. We are helpful. We are happy to help those that are in CAS. We're volunteers. And so we believe in this work. And so we want to reach out and help. And our own CAS improvement has come because of the feedback that we've gotten from our users. And so I will stop there and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you both so very much for that great presentation. One of the things that I have always just thought, one of the reasons that I think CAS is doing such a great job and is such a great group of people is that it is truly made up of people who are in the field or have been in the field and have brought that expertise into this organization and into these guidelines and all the things that they have created. So this was really great. Thanks again, both Gavin and Jen. And we do have questions coming in, and there's one on the screen now. It's kind of lengthy, so I'll read through it really quickly, and then Gavin or Jen, whichever can maybe take it apart. In leading a self-study, how do CAS standards productively intersect with accreditor standards? Self-studies need to meet accreditor standards, the go-to institutional priority for reaffirmation. So is the recommendation that the institution should map CAS standards to accreditor standards to then guide the self-study process for accreditors in a more nuanced way than what's already explicated by the accreditors? it seems difficult to mobilize staff to do 2 separate self-studies. And I think Gavin or Jen, this is probably going to be a topic covered in that next webinar, but I'm sure you have some things maybe you could comment on now.
I'll start and then I'll turn it over to Gavin. For me, I think one of the biggest intersections is the evidence piece. So we just went through reaffirmation here last spring. And so in writing those standards for assessment, the evidence piece was a huge aspect of that. And so CAS can really guide you in a deep way in being able to collect that evidence, which would then lead to working well with that self-study that you do for the accreditor. And yes, you can map the standards to the accreditor standards. There should be overlap in the sense that CAS is going to go deeper than the accrediting standards. So we're going deeper than sort of what they ask. I'm in the SAC COC region, and so this would work with what was the old 2.10, looking at student support services. That really helps, as well as the assessment. But it will be covered in that webinar. That's the quick answer. I'll turn it over to Gavin to add to that.
That's a great answer. I don't have anything else to add. Well, the only thing I would add is that even just simply going through a CAS self-study is going to give you evidence to add into an accreditation report. Each regional organization is a little bit different. NASC is has a lot less regarding student services and co-curricular assessment than some of the others. So actually doing the self-assessment is going to be a lot more than what the accreditor may cover.
And I guess the only other piece I would add is, I lost it. It's gone.
Yeah. That happens all the time, particularly when you're in stressful situations, as you are. So maybe it'll come back, Jen.
I'm sure it will.
So the next question, can you give more information about the new FALDOs? Are these focused on writing outcomes, focused on what high quality measures exist that map to certain outcomes, focused on what evidence-based programs are shown to impact outcomes?
Yeah, so this FALDOS 2.0 is a little bit different than FALDOS 1.0. FALDOS 1.0 is really a compendium of instruments and measurement tools that can be used to assess the learning domains and dimensions. The previous version of those domains you mentioned, we had 16 of them. The new FALDOS is actually more about process. So what would be the process of developing outcomes aligned with the CAS learning domains and dimensions, and how would you go about assessing that? There are suggestions for assessment methods and things like that. So it's really more about how you go do it yourself rather than what are the instruments I can pull off a shelf to do that. And what the authors have done, the authors are actually Patrick Biddix from the University of Tennessee and Darby Roberts from Texas A&M. So a long-time student affairs assessment practitioner. Darby's been doing this work for over 20 years. And Patrick Biddix has been writing a lot about this. And so they really know what they're talking about, what they bring to this document. And they really, they cluster some of the very functional areas together, so you can kind of take a look at what would be the learning outcomes for these types of functional areas, what would be the learning outcomes for these types of functional areas, and how would you go about assessing that. So it's really more of a focus on a process rather than very like a compendium or a catalog of tools.
I did remember what I was going to say, and it actually relates a little bit to the next question. But one of the things I have said to people is, if you have the evidence already prepared and you turn that in for accreditation, then you have that less intensive, let's all panic and gather it for reaffirmation. And if any of you have gone through that, you may have experienced that. So in terms of assessment, I said, if your assessment plan and report is solid, I don't have to speak to you about accreditation. I'll just use your reports as evidence. So engaging in the self-assessment process with CAS then will allow maybe less individuals to have to engage in the deeper accreditation part. And so that's just one of the ways that helped us. So we didn't do that last minute rush of, okay, everybody write a new report because we need more evidence. And then to go with, I know you were going to read this question, but it talked about buying in from units. The CAS standards are very vetted. So we have 40 member organizations, so ACRO is one of those. And so when we go through standards, we have committees, and so we have chairs of those committees, and we have experts on that, and then we also go to additional experts out of that. And then each standard is then sent to our standards committee, our standards review committee, which is people who know the standards really, really well, which help create consistency across those. We review those and give feedback back to the committee. And then it comes to the CAS council, and then it goes through there. And we are a consensus-based organization, which means if there's some part of that standard that there's disagreement about, then we have to spend time finding agreement and making that, deciding what's the best route for that before a standard can pass. So it goes under multiple areas of review, and we're always trying to partner with the professional organization. Gavin mentioned NACE earlier, and so with the career services, really working with them, they have competencies, so how do those relationships work? So that's really important to us. So these are standards that are very well vetted. Gavin, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, there'd just be two other things that it emphasizes. One, that we often get the leader in the field on the revision team. So for example, we just recently went through revision for the leadership program. So we had two of the experts who've written the most about this on that revision committee. So it's really coming from the people who are either reading about this, writing about this, doing this. And just give you a sense of the scope. We just revised this past year the master's preparation standards. We had over 100 faculty members involved in one way or another in revising that set of standards. And so our goal is to get broad, diverse perspectives, so we have as comprehensive input as possible, and they are approved by all the organizations within CAS. So the important thing to keep in mind is that these are standards approved by the field for the field. Some professional organizations have their own set of standards, which is great for them, but those are only approved by that organization. The CAS standards are approved by the entire field, 40 organizations, and that brings a lot of credibility, particularly to the institution, because for people who are not familiar with student services work, that can validate that. The work that's being done in that self-study to say, hey, these are standards that are approved by the entire field. And so I think that's important to know, and that can also add some credibility when you're using CAS for accreditation purposes.
Great. Do you want to go ahead, Kevin, and take that next question? Yeah,
in terms of cost, there are costs for the resources, and we don't want to charge a lot, but we need money to survive. We have our main source of revenue to do this work is through the sale of our the various products. And so you can find those in the store on the CAS website, cas.edu, and the store is in the right-hand corner. If you go to that resources section, those are free, and we are adding some free resources all the time. But some of the other more complex resources, there is a fee for that, probably because there's a lot of intellectual time and energy that goes into the development of those, and also that sustains our work. And so essentially, if we don't collect, we don't make profit on those, we're not able to continue to do the work that we are doing and create more and more resources. So there is a cost in that, and you can see those on the CAS website.
And one final thing, Gavin, why don't you give a shout out for your conference?
Oh, thanks. Right. So here in New England, we have a higher education assessment conference, which we do now. It's our 4th annual one that we do every year. And given all the things that are going on, we've decided we're going to go fully online. We just made that decision yesterday, so that'll be accessible to anybody outside New England as well as in New England. We'll be once we get some of the details set up about what that's going to look like, we'll be posting those on our website, and also be sending out information through the major assessment listservs. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And that someone had said, thanks for the webinar info. And when we send you the follow-up message after this webinar with the recording and with the other information. We'll include as much of that information about the next webinar coming up, and also a link to the conference site. It's been such a pleasure to work with Gavin and Jen and the CAS people, because we see this work as just so very valuable to our overall mission of improving learning through assessment as a goal for our company. And it's been a real pleasure to do that, and we'll be sending you more information. And I think, do we have another slide, Brianne? Oh, there it is. One of the things I wanted to mention to you, we've, in addition to having software that manages accreditation assessment, program review, strategic planning, all sorts of other processes on your campus, which again, when you get this message, you're going to be able to see some of that information. But also wanted to let you know that we are really excited about some of the assessment courses that we're teaching right now. A series of interactive live 6-session courses led by experienced professionals, people in the field. We've really got a great feedback from those people, as you can see with some of the comments here. Again, I keep repeating this, but in the next slide, if you take the survey at the end and tell us what you're interested in, we can certainly send you information. We promise not to bug you too much with messages. We'll send the email with the recording. Our Knowledge Center on our website has tons of resources for you, so please check that out. And I think that's all for me, unless Gavin or Jen or Brianne, anything more we need to say?
Just thank you, and CAS is here, where, you know, I have an email address, jenwells@cas.edu, but you can go to our website and connect with us, ask us questions, reach out, give us feedback. But thank you very much, and appreciate everything, and good luck out there.
Yes, for sure. Good luck out there. Take care, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Bye-bye.